Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Extreme Weather YouTube channel. My name is Justin, and I'm here joined with one of the forecasters for extreme weather. His name is Dustin, oddly enough. Very similar names. Hello, Dustin.
Hello.
Okay, so we're gonna get this video started, we're gonna get it going, but basically, I know you guys are used to the entire Atlantic forecast, however, this is just gonna be about now Hurricane Ida, as it has rapidly intensified throughout the day and is looking pretty incredible for a Category 1 and looks like it will strengthen and pretty much explode in the Gulf of Mexico. If you would like to join our Discord server's in the link. If you'd like to subscribe, you can do all that, but let's get right into the video. So here's our Atlantic map, and we can see that we have Ida, which is right here. We have 98L, which has increased in probabilities, and we have 97L, which has actually decreased in probabilities. I'll get into that later in the video if I end up getting into it. I probably won't. I'm more going to focus on Ida, like I said. However, I might briefly talk about 97L and why it got reduced in probabilities. And we actually have a new AOI, which will be a tropical wave, and that actually, I do have my eye on, and I'm sure, Dustin, you have your eye on that one too, as models have been quite bullish with it. Um, let's move on to our cone. Dustin, would you like to explain the cone?
Yes. So right now we're looking at a Hurricane Ida. It's strengthened over the day on Friday, which is today if you're watching this right away. And we're looking at a storm that is it currently has 80-mile-per-hour winds with gusts around 100 miles per hour. Right now, this storm, upon the time of recording this, the storm is over Cuba, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. But it's pretty amazing how well this storm stayed together over Cuba. Most expect storms to kind of fall apart when going over that landmass, but it's not the case. And unfortunately, for everybody in Louisiana who's watching this storm, it looks like this storm is going to continue to intensify. So, based on the National Hurricane Center's projection, it is expected to strengthen, and by the day on Saturday, which is tomorrow, it's expected to already be a major hurricane. And it's very possible that by midday Sunday that it is a category 4. And our team is currently not going to project this, but it's even possible that it could be a category 5. As I like to say, hope for the best and plan for the worst. So if you're in Louisiana, especially if you're on the coast and in low-lying areas, get out. Get out. The storm surge, the it's just not worth it. Get out. Hopefully this thing is only a category 2 or a category 1 when it makes landfall. Hopefully it weakens even if it does intensify. But you gotta plan for the worst, which is potentially a category 4, category 5 hurricane. We don't want that, but it's very possible. So we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
And
What
yeah,
do you
like
think?
Dustin said, we do have the NHC projecting that this will rapidly intensify in the Gulf and that we will actually see landfall around 140 miles per hour in Louisiana, about 90 miles west of New Orleans. So, storm surge, 10 to 15 feet potentially will definitely be an issue with this. And if you are under an evacuation order or even a voluntary evacuation, you might want to consider leaving. If you're under an evacuation order, a mandatory one, you need to leave. It would not be smart to stay. If you're under a voluntary evacuation, obviously follow what your local officials are saying. However, you might want to consider leaving anyway. All right, let's move on to our storm, or actually a closer look into where the hurricane warnings are, the tropical storm warnings, watches. We can see there's a large area of hurricane warnings that actually go rather far inland, and we can see all the way from the Mississippi border. New Orleans is under a hurricane warning. Grand Isle is under a hurricane warning. Grand Isle storm surge actually could be quite devastating and quite catastrophic. So if you are in Grand Isle, you need to leave. That is really not an option at this point. It is going to be a catastrophic event probably for the Grand Isle area and really just this entire coastline that I just marked in that pink color. We can see East or west of Baton Rouge, quite far west of Baton Rouge, we have our tropical storm warning, which goes all the way to the Texas border, and that includes Lake Charles. And then we have tropical storm warnings up in parts of southern Mississippi. And then we have tropical storm watches that go really far inland, all the way almost into Jackson, Mississippi. So if you again are in a hurricane warning, you're going to want to watch this and potentially evacuate. Even if you're in a tropical storm warning, you're going to want to really watch this because tracks do shift and they probably will with this. Dustin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think again, we want to emphasize and re-emphasize that if you are in a low-lying area, I know much of that bayou south of New Orleans, much of that is below sea level, and the only thing between your livelihood and the Gulf of Mexico or the Mississippi River, or the bayou or the swamp is a levee system. And while we hope the levee system will hold up, we all learned a valuable lesson from Hurricane Katrina that you might unfortunately be able to replace a home, but you can't replace your life. So if you are in anywhere where there's a mandatory evacuation or even a voluntary evacuation, do the right thing, move inland, uh, get away from water. As they, I heard it once said that you hide from wind, but you flee from water. Hide from wind, flee from water. So if your only issue or your only uh, weather, uh, you know, if you're facing wind, you want to get to the most interior room, be away from doors and windows. Places like Baton Rouge, places like um, Alexandria, places like the north side of Lake Pontchartrain. Wind is going to be your primary constraint, so you may not need to evacuate. Get into the most interior room, be away from doors and windows. But if you're anywhere on the coast, if you're in Homa, if you're in Grand Isle, if you're anywhere along there, you need to get inland. I cannot stress that enough.
And the city of New Orleans actually has issued a voluntary evacuation order for the entire city of New Orleans. And they have issued a mandatory evacuation order for parts that are not protected by the levees. So, once again, if you aren't protected by the levee system, if you're under that mandatory evacuation, you're putting your own life in danger by staying. And like I said, the entire city of New Orleans is under a voluntary evacuation order. That does mean that it is up to you if you want to leave. However, no, once this thing makes landfall, leaving might not be an option. All right.
Yes.
Let's move on to our rainfall forecast. And we can see this is by the Weather Prediction Center that we have a ton of rainfall that will fall in the greater New Orleans area, actually. And we could have up to 15, maybe even more than that, inches of rain. So that is not good. On top of the storm surge that we will already be seeing moving into parts of New Orleans, into parts of the coast, where we could see 15 or 10 to 15 feet across this part of the coast, we're going to have 15 inches of rain. That is more than a foot of rain, and that will just add to the flooding concerns. And like Dustin said, you can hide from wind, but once the flooding starts, there's nothing you can do other than get to higher ground and hope for the best. And that's not what you want to be doing with this system. All right, let's move to our storm surge map. Like I've said a couple times, we have our 10 to 15 area over in this general region, which is where the storm will most likely make landfall, right here near Morgan City. This number will likely go up, possibly above 15, like it did with Laura. And really, we're just gonna have to hope for the best and hope that it doesn't strengthen as much as we're anticipating it to. However, there's nothing stopping this thing from going, from really explosive development in the Gulf. So you can read this map for yourself. We'll give you 5 seconds to read it, or you can pause the video. But here it is. All right. Now let's move on to our tropical storm force wind probabilities. And Dustin, I'll let you explain the wind probabilities and the hurricane probabilities.
Yeah. So basically, what this map means is if that particular color is over your city or your town, that denotes what your probability is to experience that wind speed. So anywhere in Alabama, anywhere in northern Mississippi, even to the extent of Arkansas, parts of Texas, um, on the east side of Texas, that's anywhere between a 5 and 30% chance for tropical storm. But if you're looking at that purple area, that's 90 to 100%. Basically, a guarantee that you're going to experience tropical storm force winds. Now, this map is very interesting because it looks at pretty much uh, all possible and all probable possibilities. I know that's a lot of, a lot of terms that have to do with statistics. But basically, what it's looking at is, if the storm was to completely dissolve, what would the chance be for tropical storm force winds? Or what if it intensifies to a Category 5 hurricane? What are the chances? What if it goes to the left or to the right, to the east, to the west? It's looking at every possible circumstance, and then it's predicting based on where it could go. Uh, so looking at the hurricane projection, now we're still a little over 2 days out from a possible uh, first interaction with hurricane force winds. So if Justin, you can look at that next map.
Yeah.
Um,
Were
so
you gonna finish that or?
let's look at the hurricane probability map. So there's still between a 50 and 60% on the southern areas of Louisiana. I do expect that to rise significantly as the day goes on. Again, it's a very minimal possibility, but there is possibilities that take this storm and it could potentially weaken, and we hope it weakens. But unfortunately, that's not what we're looking at with the conditions in the Gulf, the sea surface temperatures, the lack of wind shear. There was a possibility earlier in forecasting that there could have been some southerly shear from a trough of low pressure in the Bay of Campeche or the Mexico area, but it's looking like that's not going to happen. It's basically just the steering flow from the Bermuda High, and that's about it. Um, that's basically indicating what the track is going to be, and that's why the likelihood for hurricane force winds are so high. Anytime you see a number in the 60s or 50s or higher, that's a number for concern. And considering we're 2 3 days out from hurricane force winds, in the making landfall in the United States, that's very impressive right there.
Yeah. And honestly, this map is from this morning. It hasn't been updated, at least from what I believe, because I think I did see this. Um, oh no, it's from 2 p.m. today. So not quite this morning, but it's still earlier, before the NHC actually upgraded their wind potential for 140-mile-per-hour winds at landfall. So I do think that this number, especially here in Cuba, as this is making landfall, will go up significantly. I think we're gonna end up seeing by tomorrow 90 to 100% chances of hurricane force winds in this area at least, and
Oh
it
yeah, for
could get
sure.
expanded into this part of the cone too.
Yes, we also need to look out for the possibility of the wind field expanding. As the storm moves over the Gulf, it's very likely that the storm is going to intensify, and then it's going to enter what is called an eye wall replacement cycle. And typically, what happens is as the storm is, in essence, replacing the inner eye wall, the whatever was the inner eye wall will form banding, and it'll actually create for a larger wind field, and this will expand not only the tropical storm force winds and the overall reach of the storm, but also expand the hurricane force wind field. So Um, Based on what we're seeing with the storm now, the strongest winds are contained to the eye wall. But what you see with these storms that are intensifying, going through eye wall replacement cycles, is that hurricane force wind is not just in the eye wall, but it's actually in bands surrounding the eye wall as well, upwards of even 100 to maybe even 150 miles away from the center of circulation, depending on how big the storm gets. Now, I'm not providing an exact forecast for what I think the extent of hurricane force winds will be. In fact, if I go to the National Hurricane Center website, I know I'm kind of doing this on the go, I can actually give you an exact number for that. And so while I'm getting that number, do you have anything to say, Justin?
Yeah, I just do have to say that even if you are in an area that has a 30 or even 20% chance, I mean, I circled probably the wrong area because that area likely will experience very minimal hurricane force winds if it does end up making it that far inland at that strength. However, even if you're in only a 40 to 50%, right here where I just circled, that's a great example. That area is only in a 40 to 50% chance of tropical storm or of hurricane force winds. No, this map is from this morning, and like Dustin said, it's all probabilistic. There's always a chance it could weaken, there's always a chance of something happening. This area almost has a guarantee of experiencing hurricane force winds. This entire area right here. So even if you're only in a 40 to 50% chance of experiencing it, you need to be prepared, especially if you are
Yeah.
along the coast.
Yeah, and two things real quick. So, looking at the National Hurricane Center's forecast, the they're considering it to be 64 knots, which is about 75 miles per hour. It is uh, the radius is about 30 nautical miles, or about 35 to 40 standard miles. So obviously that's not anywhere near the 150, that we've seen with larger hurricanes like Katrina, or going way back in history. Relatively speaking, I remember going through Hurricane Francis, which was a massive storm, and even though uh, I'm not going to share that story, but we, where I was at, we were pretty far from the the landfall point, but we still experienced hurricane force winds because the field was so big. We're not The National Hurricane Center is not necessarily expecting that wide of a swath of hurricane force winds right now. But if you think about it, if the radius is uh, is 30 or 40 miles, then the width of that is 100 miles, or close to 80 to 100 miles. So think about that. Also, one more thing to note super quickly, because this storm is not moving uh, due north, it's going to begin its motion toward the state of Louisiana, uh, moving to the north and to the west. It's going to That hurricane force winds is going to impact a wider portion of the coast. So even though the swath may be 60 miles, it's going to impact, with hurricane force winds, potentially 200 to 250 miles of the coast, which is incredibly significant. And that's just by how the storm is moving in reference to the coast as it makes landfall.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna move on to what this thing currently looks like on satellite, and then we will move into our intensity guidance, our track guidance, microwave imagery, and then finally, we'll go into models. But right now we're gonna go look at satellite, and we will be right back. All right, we are back. Now we're looking at infrared imagery. So you can see that this thing is moving right over Cuba right now. Its core is right on top of Cuba, and it's somehow continuing to produce convection, continuing to intensify, and continuing to organize. We can see all of that banding right around here, and you can see that it's just got outflow channels. It's got everything that you would expect before a rapidly intensifying storm, except it's not before a rapidly intensifying storm. It is currently rapidly intensifying, even though it is sitting right on top of a country. It is sitting over land, and it is still organizing and possibly even intensifying, which is incredible to see and witness. Our saving grace really for this, hey, maybe it won't be as strong, was okay, it could weaken over Cuba. It could get less organized. It could possibly weaken to the point where it'd have trouble rebounding in the Gulf. No, that is not what is happening, and that is so worrying because chances are we're going to see even more explosive development and more explosive strengthening if this is doing what it's currently doing, which is organizing on top of land. So, if it's organizing on top of land, what do you guys think it's going to do once it goes into some of the most favorable conditions that I've really ever seen? And I know Dustin has said that it's some of the more favorable conditions he's seen too. Right, Dustin?
Yes, this storm is absolutely ridiculous. I've been following hurricanes very closely since 2016. Um, I didn't see this with Dorian. I didn't see this with Laura, with Michael. This far out from Louisiana. I mean, it. Most forecasts had it crossing Cuba as a tropical storm and then becoming a Category 1 about 12 to 24 hours after leaving Cuba. It's already it's already a Cat 1, and by the looks of it, it could even be a Cat 2 by 5 a.m. Eastern time, and it could be a Cat 3 by 5 p.m. on Saturday. This is ridiculous, and this storm is super resilient even with some of the mountainous conditions.
Yeah.
I'm flabbergasted. I have no words. Justin, are you in agreement with me on
Yeah, I
this?
mean, everybody
Wow.
I know yesterday when I was forecasting this thing, I was saying, yeah, it's probably going to be right around here, maybe 55, 60, maybe 65 miles per hour at most. It's 80 miles per hour, likely stronger than that at this point, and it's over land and continuing to strengthen. I don't know how it's doing this, and why it's doing this, and what it will do once it gets into the Gulf, and I'm scared to see what it's going to do once it gets into the Gulf. However, it's 20 miles per hour ahead of schedule right now. NHC was forecasting 60 miles per hour once it hit Cuba. It's 80. So we're 20 miles per hour ahead of schedule at least right now. Meaning it could be 20 miles per hour ahead of schedule once it makes landfall in Louisiana. We'll have to wait and see. Um, yeah, that's what things are looking like right now for infrared. I mean, there's really not much else to see. If we look at visible satellite, it's just going to confirm that this thing is going crazy, and there's really no point in seeing that. You can see all the lightning in that convective burst. You can see that. I'll let it go for another scan there. You can see how much lightning, and usually lightning with a tropical system does mean intensification, because it's not like an ordinary thunderstorm where you're going to get a lot of lightning. With tropical systems in the eye wall, it's actually quite fascinating to see eye wall lightning. And that's very evidently what's going on right now. Let's move back to our current model guidance, and then we will move on to our future forecasts and other model guidance. All
And my
right.
phone is at 2%, so I need to figure out a way to charge it.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
welcome back, everybody. We are going to look at some intensity guidance right now. Dustin, if you need to go charge your phone, that's totally fine. But we're gonna look at some intensity guidance now. And we can see that our models have uptrended ridiculously hard from yesterday. Yesterday, majority of models were in the Cat 2, maybe Cat 3 range, but once this thing put on a show of rapid intensification earlier, the majority of models have jumped up to Category 4 status at peak. So that's a pretty big jump. And we can see that they are expecting very rapid intensification. One model even taking this near Category 5 before it makes landfall, and then obviously will weaken, unless, who knows, that would be crazy if it just kind of did the brown ocean effect, but either way it'd weaken. It's really not even possible for this thing to stay at strength inland. That won't happen, obviously. But we can see, I'm just gonna make my personal, like, I don't know, my personal model guidance for this, and I'd say what I'm expecting, follow the pink line, is I think it's going to put on actually, I'm gonna delete that because I'm gonna put even faster intensification. I really do think this thing's gonna go crazy. I'd say something like this even, and then I think it could get to mid to upper end Category 4, before it drops back down and weakens. It could even go higher than what I just showed, or it could go lower, who knows. But that's what I'm currently thinking for this. And that's what the NHC actually is kind of thinking too. They're thinking mid to upper end category 4 also. Here's our track
Yeah.
guidance. And you can see that track still has remained pretty consistent. We have one model. They actually spread a little bit more since yesterday, but we have one model that takes this into Mississippi.
Yeah, and just real quickly to comment on the intensity guidance. So, um, at extreme weather, we are believing that this will be a high-end Category 4 hurricane. That is definitely not something to uh, take lightly. However, as Justin had mentioned, it is possible for this to be a Category 5 hurricane. While we're not going to predict that, and while we're not going to necessarily make that our forecast, it's definitely potentially in the cards for it to be a Category 5 hurricane. So we need to be continuing to watch this, and we'll know a lot more by the end of the day tomorrow. If by the end of the day tomorrow we're looking at a Category 4 hurricane already, then that is definitely a concern. But if tomorrow ends and we're only at a 3 or a 2, then maybe it's only going to end up being a 3 or 4 by the time it reaches its max intensity.
Yeah. Now we'll move back to our track forecast, and you can see models actually have been gotten a little bit less confident on placement, and although they are still very confident on a uh, basically 100 miles west of New Orleans landfall. You can see that one model has this going into Mississippi. I really don't think that's going to happen, and if that is what happened, it would be considerably weaker. I mean, it'd still probably be a major hurricane, but it'd definitely be weaker than if it took the current and projected path, which is what most models are thinking right now. And then we have one or two models, actually three models that take this over much more east, or much more west of what we're currently thinking, and much more west of New Orleans. That would be a pretty good scenario for New Orleans if that's what ended up happening, but it'd be a pretty bad scenario for, say, Lake Charles or Lafayette. All right, here's our microwave imagery. This is from a couple hours ago, actually. So actually, not a couple hours ago, more like an hour or two ago, and we can see that a core has developed quite obviously right here, and we can see all of that ridiculous amount of banding. Look at this amount of banding that's coming around and just feeding energy into this core, and we can see that an eye wall has started to form, and an eye wall actually has completely formed. We have a full eye wall with an eye on radar, and it is quite impressive, the radar imagery. So I will say right now with confidence that an eye wall has fully formed and is fully intact, even going right over Cuba. Now we are going to head over to our models and see what they're thinking for the future of this system. So yeah. Alrighty, so welcome back. We are here, and now we're looking at some model guidance. Here is our H-Wharf model, and you can see we are at 1002 millibars as of now on the H-Wharf, and you can see that it's passing and hitting Cuba at 984, which actually is pretty much the intensity that we're hitting Cuba with right now. So H-Wharf is right on track. And then we're going weakening or strengthening to 965 within just a matter of, let's see. Right here we're at OZ Saturday. We are at 968 18Z Saturday. So what is that? 12 hours? Would you say? 12 18 hours? So
18Z Saturday?
0Z Saturday to 18Z Saturday. What would you say that is?
0Z to 18Z, that's 18 hours.
Oh, yeah. So, 18 hours, a 20 millibar drop. That's pretty significant. And then 6Z Sunday, we're at 945. 12Z Sunday, 941. 15Z Sunday, 939. 18Z Sunday, 936. 21Z Sunday, 933. And then we make landfall at 120 knots according to this model with a 933 millibar pressure. That is deep into category 4 status. That is mid-range category 4, I believe, if I'm doing my knots to miles per hour calculations correctly. And then we go inland and we're around 51 knots once we're pretty far inland at 967 millibars. Continuing to move inland, we're now at 31 knots. This is where it'd likely be a depression. And you can see that we are now pretty far inland where it'd just be a rain and potentially a tornado threat. Let's now move over to our HMON model. And let's get this going. So the HMON had landfall at 985, which actually is also super accurate. Okay, no, it had landfall at 978 in Cuba, so that is a bit lower than what actually ended up occurring. However, either way, that's still pretty similar. And we can see that once we exit Cuba, we're at 983 at 3Z Saturday. Let's scroll over to 15Z Saturday, and we're at 964. Wow, that's some really crazy intensification. That's 13 hours. We dropped 20 millibars. Wow. That would be quite incredible if that ended up happening. That would be some extreme intensification. And obviously the context which I used incredible in was out of this world crazy. And obviously not like good, because that would not be good at all. Let's continue moving forward. We're at 128 knots, 955, 123, and this has it making landfall at 943 millibars and showing barely a Category 3 hurricane. I think the max wind, especially on these models, can be quite deceiving. I think usually they're not the most accurate. I'd look more at pressure than I would at the wind because, yeah, you can see we're pretty close to the coast still, and we're still only at 48 knots. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think it's probably underdoing the max wind. Dustin, would you agree?
Yes, I would definitely agree.
Okay, so you can see we have our HMON model making landfall at 946 millibars in pretty much central Louisiana. Alright, so this would actually be pretty good for New Orleans. I mean, you'd still get some storm surge, probably some tornadoes, but you wouldn't get too much of the actual system itself. Let's go to our GFS model and scroll back. Alright, let's wait for it to render a little bit. Alright, so we have landfall in Cuba at 992, so we're actually stronger than what the GFS was projecting. Let's move forward, and we come off the coast of Cuba at 992. I think that's pretty weak for what will end up happening. 990, and let's move forward.
The GFS does trend pretty weak in comparison to reality.
Yeah, let's go, in a matter of a couple hours, we're down 10 millibars again, so pretty extreme intensification. And then landfall right near New Orleans at 958 millibars. And 93 knot winds. See, yeah, if we're at 958 millibars, we're not having a not even major hurricane. Like, I'm sorry, that's just not gonna happen. Like, the GFS, especially with max wind, is not doing the best job at this. I think with pressure, it's doing fine, possibly, but with max wind, it's definitely not. Yeah, see, 41 knots right near the coast. No, that's just not.
I foresee this it'll be in the 930s or 940s and landfall. Could be lower, but I think the consensus is in that region.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the GFS is definitely tracking a little more east of the H-Wharf and the H-Mon. And the GFS has actually overall been doing better with its track predictions in comparison to previous years. So if you're in New Orleans, you should definitely prepare for a hurricane.
And even if this does go towards New Orleans, and goes towards the eastern part of the cone, don't underestimate it. Yes, maybe it'll be, instead of 140, 130. Maybe it'll be a little bit weaker, but it'll still be a major hurricane. That's almost a guarantee. Whether it moves into New Orleans or whether it moves into Lake Charles, it will still most likely be a major hurricane. The conditions in the Gulf are crazy. I mean, something that you don't see quite often.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. All right, let's move on over to our final points to note in our closing statement for what we should be watching with this system, and then we will end off the video. Alright, so we are back, and here is our key messages for Hurricane Ida. I know I usually do a slide that I kind of make, but just because of the severity of the system, we're going to look at the actual National Hurricane Center key statements and see what they're expecting. Dustin, anything you would like to highlight upon in the key messages?
Oh yeah, for sure. So number one in there says life-threatening storm surge and hurricane conditions are expected to continue through tonight in portions of western Cuba. Um, I do want to focus though, because most of our audience is in the United States. I want to focus on the potential for life-threatening surge and hurricane conditions in Louisiana. Again, as we said toward the beginning of this broadcast or this episode, whatever you want to call it, we discussed that you hide from wind, but you flee from water. And if there is an expectation for flooding, for flash flooding, or for storm surge, and all those are very likely, especially in the southern areas of Louisiana, even within 30 miles of the coast and in the low-lying areas, you got to be careful. If you're in a mandatory evacuation, you need to go. You cannot risk your life with this. And I hate to use such words. I don't want to hype it up. I know Justin would agree with me on that. But if you're in a mandatory evacuation, there's a reason for that. There's a chance, it's not a big chance, but there's a chance that this could be a Category 5 hurricane. And if so, this could be one of the most destructive storms ever to make landfall in the United States. Do we expect that to happen? Hopefully not. Do we hope that to happen? Of course not. But you need to be weather aware. You need to be ready. And if you're in these areas, the time is now. Get your stuff. Shut this. If you're in Louisiana, I know we've had you for a long time. Shut off the video. Get your stuff, pack up, and go. There's no time to waste.
Yeah. I'd agree. If we're not necessarily talking about the entire state of Louisiana, because like for the people who are in northern Louisiana near the Arkansas border, like if you're up there, you're fine, of course. If you're more inland, you're most likely fine. It'll be more of a wind threat. But if you're on the coast of Louisiana, especially in that hurricane warning, it's time to go. It's not something you want to stick around for, and you're risking your life if you do. Actually, I'm going to read a tweet from National Weather Service New Orleans because they actually state it quite best, to be totally honest with you. I'm just going to pull up the tweet here really quickly. NWS New Orleans on
That'd be a
Twitter.
great way to end.
The Cuban radar shows Hurricane Ida crossing Cuba and showing no signs of weakening. If Ida maintains a good inner core, it will intensify quickly as it enters the Gulf. Do not underestimate this. If you are asked to leave, leave. You are putting your life in danger if you don't.
Wow. That's a very poignant statement by the National Weather Service in New Orleans. We cannot state that enough.
Yep. Alright, we'll be back with a video tomorrow, and hopefully it's some good news to share, but chances are it won't be. Have a good day,
Yep.
everybody.